Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Now That's Debatable. This is your host, Fantastic Facade. I'm joined with my co host, Geocentric Skeptic, and we have our special guest speaker today on Nico. Everybody with me? Everybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Yeah, I'm
Perfect.
copy.
Welcome. So, we are going to be taking on a topic that we have discussed a little bit before, and we've kind of hit on similar topics, but we have a guest speaker on that probably has a slightly different, if not altogether different, opinion of our own to the concept of Pride and Pride Month. So we're going to be taking that on. I have some of our topics and subtopics that we will try to get through all of on today's episode. We also have our call-in option up on the screen, and of course our chat is live as usual, so if you ask a question in chat, as per our tradition, we will read out your chat on screen and answer any questions or respond to it accordingly. If you can in chat, be specific, because sometimes we're going through multiple topics or jumping around. We may not know exactly what your question refers to or to whom it's directed. Other than that, we're almost at 400 followers on Facebook. We'd like to continue growing, so if you don't mind giving us a like, a follow, a share, subscribe. It doesn't cost you a dime. If you like what we're doing, please continue to support us. If you'd like us to take on a specific topic, please let us know. With all of that out of the way, where do you guys want to start?
You can start with it wherever you wanted to start, Nico. But like I do I'd like to at first address, I guess, what kind of led to the conversation in the first place. We were talking about what constitutes homophobia.
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah. And so, and I don't remember exactly how the conversation ended. I know we said we were going to get you on, but
Sure.
I don't know what the last argument was. So
Yeah.
could you tell me your position? I mean, I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, the what I had asked on it was a Facebook post, and I asked a question, and I asked if the umbrella term, because homophobia or someone being labeled as homophobic has become somewhat of an umbrella term. And so what I asked is if under that umbrella term was included those who felt that homosexuality as a practice is sinful. Now, what I did not state was necessarily that person's personal opinion towards someone who practices that lifestyle or necessarily towards um, homosexuality, but rather just the I guess categorization of it as a sin is kind of what the question I posed. Because, and I'll state explicitly, I don't think that if someone believes the practice of homosexuality is sinful, I don't
Mhm.
believe that person should fall under the umbrella term of homophobic or homophobia.
Can I ask
Gotcha.
a clarifying question for you?
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
just real quick. So, you say, like, for instance, if someone believes it's a sin, what would you define as a sin? Like, how would
Mhm.
you define what a sin is, a sinful act, if you will? And
Yes.
essentially, like, what is the source of that?
Yep, absolutely. So I'll give you as simple as a definition as I can, but I do want to acknowledge that this can be a really deep rabbit hole.
Fair enough.
But
The reason I ask is
yeah, but
because if you're saying you look at it as a sin, I want to know what you mean by sin, because
yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna
if you
give no. Yeah, I'm gonna give you a very direct definition. I just also wanted to preface that this can be a very deep rabbit hole. But how
that's
I
okay.
define sin as something that is morally wrong. Meaning that if you're a financial advisor, you could say, "Hey, putting your money over there or over here is wrong," but it's not morally wrong. It isn't, and by morally, I mean essentially. And again, this is where it gets a lot deeper, but morally wrong as in ethically wrong or wrong to do, um, as far as
So, I mean, most people would say morals
Yeah,
involve like good or bad. They don't necessarily mean
sure, yeah,
ethics. Ethics typically
absolutely.
refer to
I,
like,
I, I thought you meant it under like a religious context, but
Well, you
you're not
can
using it in that way.
No, not necessarily at all.
Okay.
Not necessarily at all. Because I also believe, for example, that murder is wrong, but I don't believe that because of religion.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Same
fair
thing with lying.
Okay.
So fair enough. So you would say that the person or the act of homosexuality, someone who is homosexual or someone who practices homosexuality, is sinful.
Specifically, the practice.
Okay, so a person who is but doesn't practice it isn't sinful.
That's correct.
Okay.
Because sin is not based on emotion, it's based on action. So if you feel attracted, if you're a male and you feel attracted to a male, there's a plethora of reasons that could be your reality, but you are not subject, in my opinion, to sin, or as far as I understand moral code and ethics. It's the same as wanting having the desire to kill someone. That's not morally wrong, in my opinion.
So
but the act is.
In your own worldview, there's no such thing as a thought crime. Is that correct?
No such thing as a what now?
A thought crime. I can't think so I can't think something, and then that would be a sin or a crime, if you will. I can't think about.
I would say limited to actions, right?
Yes, yeah. I would say yes, not a thought crime. Correct.
Okay, so there's no such thing as thought crime.
So this is how I address it. Like I think it's from a post that I had posted, and I said like, wishing all the homophobes a very something. I wish all the homophobes a very uncomfortable month. And so I guess I wasn't very careful with that. Like I try to stay away from labels that could describe an entire person's character, and I rather look at their actions. So like instead of saying something like this person's racist, I'm more comfortable in saying this act was racist instead of describing the entirety of a person's character as a racist, because people are complicated, right? So just like, and so, however, so when it comes to people who say they have no personal animus against homosexuals or anyone who's other than like a cisgender, right? But they say, but because of their but they just believe that it's sinful, right? And because I had the assumption that you meant that under the religious context, kind of like a person who would say, hey, I have no problem with homosexuals, but the Bible that I read or the Quran that I read tells me that's wrong. And just for clarification, you're not saying that.
Well, I was not specifically saying that. However, I would include that in my essentially my thesis or my point of view, because whether it's for a personal reason or for a reason based on a religious text, I still don't believe that person for those reasons should fall under the umbrella of homophobia.
Gotcha. So what if I were to say that like I have no personal grudge with Asians. However, my holy book tells me that Asians are evil.
Okay.
But would that still be racist?
Well, it depends. It depends what. So then the next question would be, so then what? Right? So if you say my religious text identifies Asian individuals as evil, and so honestly, that statement stands alone. And so it's like, okay, then one could categorize that religious text as, wrong, incorrect, evil, whatever the case may be, but not necessarily the person, because they believe that religious text. And I'll give you an example, a personal example. And when I went to college at Liberty University, we both did, and I met a young lady who believed that according to the Bible, people were not supposed to marry and have children with people of other ethnic backgrounds. Like if you were essentially, and I thought that her thinking was completely incorrect, but she felt that if you were white, Anglo-Saxon, you're supposed to be with that type of person. If you're black, you're supposed to be with a black person. And, in that discussion, I found a whole lot of holes in her argument, but I just want to distinguish this. I don't categorize her as racist, or
I wouldn't even.
Yeah, because she just believed that to be the case,
But
and she lived according to that religious text, and so that was her belief.
would call that opinion racist. Like, I wouldn't describe her entire character as racist, but that opinion would be racist, even though it's built on a foundation of religious literature. Like the fact that it's her religious belief, for me, it wouldn't change that. It would
Well,
still
for
be a
me,
racist opinion.
I don't know that I would even call it racist because she didn't identify one ethnicity being better than the other or one
I
being
mean,
over
she
another.
explicitly
She was
stated
just
that
saying
she didn't
not
want
to
them to
mix.
mix.
So, but you don't have to, like, you don't have to believe in some sort of, ideology of supremacy to, or for something to be racist. Like, I can just say, uh like Asians are going to be good at math, or black people are going to be good at basketball. Like, and there's nothing supremacist about that. But still, that would be a racist stereotype. That would be a form of racism.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay,
also
we can dig into that another time. I don't know if
Okay.
I agree with that, but we can dig into that. That's a little off topic.
Okay, it is.
I
It is.
also
I
just
agree.
wanted to clarify that in two things real quick. One, she explicitly stated she didn't want races to mix. So that, I mean, that's at best prejudicial, if not worse, racist.
Sorry, she explicitly stated that she didn't want what?
Racist to mix. She basically thought it was not coherent or not good that racists could mix. So she would basically want exclusion of races. That by definition
Okay.
is at least a racist ideal. I mean, not saying that she herself was racist, but the
Well,
concept
well,
of
let me,
non-mixing of
well,
races.
I know this is on a different topic, but define racism for me before we continue.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's racism is an idea or concept that there's either there's some inferiority or superiority to other races in some aspect, and or
Well, see, that was my
fear
point.
of
Was
other
that there was no
races.
identification of inferiority or superiority.
That's what
Yeah,
I would broaden that, and I would say, like, make it some sort of judgment based on the
well, that's what I said.
person's
I mean, that's what I
skin or
continued with my.
ethnicity,
I
rather
don't know if
than them as an
am I
individual.
super quiet compared to you guys? Because I was trying to finish that statement.
Oh,
You know what? It's
Essentially,
It
I
sounds
said
like
I said that it would also include prejudice or being fearful or scared of other races. So, like, prejudicial treatment and or ideology is the same. Like, that's also under my definition of racism.
well, I don't know that that's prejudicial at all.
So
I don't think
let's
there's anything that she said that constitutes prejudice.
we're a bit off topic, but it's
off
undoubtedly
topic.
prejudicial.
this is totally my fault, because I was using an argument from analogy, and now we're arguing about the analogy.
Yeah.
And so there was another thing that I wanted to had talk about, and I said I was gonna let you pick. Sorry, but, like, there was one of you had posted it in the private chat that we had going on prior to the show, and
Oh, yeah.
and you had talked about what is a woman. I don't have to
Correct.
talk about that now, but we can get
Sure.
to it at some point.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, whenever it's I'm open. I'm open to discuss whatever, whenever. So I mean, hey, why
Okay.
not right now?
Okay. Well, I like to know, like what do you think a woman is? Like, cause I mean, I was just curious as to why you even asked that question. Like, it's
Yeah,
interesting to me.
yeah. I thought that was a good question to ask. Both what is a woman and what is a man. Because it's all connected to the discussion. But I will give my definition of what I believe a woman is.
Okay.
A woman is the adult version of a human female. There's human females that are fetuses, infants, toddlers, teenagers, and when they're adults, the title is woman.
So to
Gotcha.
clarify, you think that adult female and woman are synonymous?
Correct.
Okay.
So yeah, I'd agree with that. So no, I'm sure you're familiar with that, with Matt Walsh. He came out with a documentary by that
Yes,
same
sir.
title, and he was using this to argue against transgenderism.
Yes.
And so I didn't actually watch it. I didn't see it.
I
But,
did not either.
okay, so because my issue with questions like that, it is first of all, in biology, it's really hard to come down on set definitions. So like what is a woman? Like what you had described, it was something that I would agree with. And what that does, it raises another question. Well, what's a female?
Hmm.
So like, and that's where we kind of get into the weeds, right? Because like if for a transgender woman, I would call a female. But you wouldn't think that's a female, right?
Correct.
Okay. So why isn't that a female?
Because a female is based on uh, female reproductive organs. In order to be a female, you must have female reproductive organs. In order to be a male, you must have male reproductive organs.
So that's the way they categorize. That's the way they determine your biological sex when you're first born, and it works perfectly well for about 99% of the population.
Okay.
However, there's a small percentage where it doesn't work. Like you're familiar with like ambiguous sex organs, right? Sometimes it's the penis will look so small it might look like a clitoris, and the testicles might look like lips, right? And so like there's kind of in between, right? And so there's other ways you could categorize it too, right? You can look at the chromosomes, right? You do a DNA test, right? And so you could say if it's XX is the female, if it's XY, it's a male. The problem is that's not binary either, right? Because it's not just XX and XY. There's also X, right? There's also XXY and XXXY and XXXXY and XYY and I mean and XYYY. I mean, like, it goes on. There's a lot of different types of these. So it makes no sense for me to try to bunch all of these different variations into these binary terms. And also biologically, the way we just describe biological sex, we don't actually use the sex organs. What we do, we look at the gametes, right? So if you have if you have a bunch of small gametes, we call them sperm, you're a male. If you have a few large gametes, then we call them egg, you're a female. So like depending on what context you're using.
Wait. Sorry, I gotta stop you there.
Sure.
When you're saying we call them, who is we?
Well, that's the way they determine it in biology.
Whether what is a male or female? Whether a human, that's for humans, or that's just across the board?
For the animal kingdom.
Okay.
For the animal kingdom, it is the size of the gametes. However, it doesn't always work, right? Because
is it not true? Now I'm not too familiar and educated on gametes, but is it not true that? But isn't there consistency between what the gametes identify and what that body, whether it be animal, mammal, human, what that body ends up developing as?
Most of the time, yes, but it's not always the case. That's the thing where it starts to get fudgy. It gets really fuzzy, right? Because you can look like a female and be producing small gametes, spermatozoa or sperm, right? And you can look like a male and have producing eggs. There was one father of 4. He thought he had a hernia. He was trying to get it removed. They found out it wasn't a hernia. It was a uterus with fallopian tubes. There weren't any eggs in it. But but by your definition, he would be categorized as a woman, right? There was another.
Wait, now you said he was a father of 4, as in he fertilized a woman with his sperm.
He sure did. He had a penis.
Okay.
He also had a uterus and fallopian tubes, and I was just using your definition, right? By his sex organs.
Sure.
So according to his sex organs, like he could fit into either category.
Correct. And based on what you said about him, I just want to point out that. Sure. Based on what you said about him, I do want to point out that my definition remains. This individual is a deviation. We don't define things by deviation. We define them by the consistent. So because in the number you gave earlier was 99%, that's the consistent. We don't define a term by the deviation. He's clearly a deviation. Wait a minute. I just want to say, how many humans find themselves in the position that he's in? Very few. And of those that do, even when you look at those who identify as transgender, or and whether it be transition from a male to female or female to male, the percentage of even those individuals that have the circumstances that he has is still extremely slim. I would say slim to none.
So here's the thing. So like it's a small percentage, but we're talking about like it's 1 to 2% out of 8 billion people. That's amounting to 170 to 200 million people.
It's certainly not. It's certainly not 1 to 2%.
It's 1.7% to be exact.
1.7%. Exactly what
is the number of people that are born intersex.
Okay. I would have to research that and see the data on that myself, but
that's what I was saying.
1.7%, sounds like a lot to me. But either way, still 98.3% is quite a high percentage in and of itself.
So, but here's the thing. So that means you're gonna have hundreds of millions of people, right? Like almost the entire nation of Russia. Right, hundreds of millions of people who don't fit into either category.
Okay.
So that's why when in science when we use these definitions, they're not like all inclusive. Like sometimes we have to most of the cases when we're just talking about male and female, we're referring to the anatomy of the gamete, right?
Okay.
But like not some people don't produce any gametes at all. Right. Okay. So someone who's infertile, so there's no sperm or no egg, right? So it wouldn't make sense to say, okay, so you just don't have a sex. No. So now you have another definition you can use. You can refer to the sex organ. And so, but maybe that's ambiguous. Right? It's okay. We have another definition we can use. We can also use the chromosome. On top of that, like that is just with humans. Like you have different you have animals who all produce the same size gamete. So that so for our definition, so the way we classify sex in mammals, this wouldn't apply to everything. Like it wouldn't apply to flounder.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying. So it depends you really have to look at the broader context of biological sex. And am I wrong when you brought that up? You were trying to get to you're trying to get to transgenderism. Am I wrong?
When I sent you the message of no.
Okay.
No, not necessarily.
Okay, because
but I'm more than willing to talk about transgenderism, certainly.
Sure. Because good. Because I just wanted to. I didn't want to give the impression that people who say that they're transgender, they're not saying they're transsex. So if I'm not trans, but if I said I was transgender, that I wouldn't be saying that I am biologically a female.
Sure.
So that's different. So because when we I think it was other things you had talked about in there. You had sex versus gender in defining man and woman, right?
Correct.
So and so we're talking about like the differences of them.
Sure.
I'm over here. I'm steamrolling the conversation. So tell me your thoughts on what a sex versus gender is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that consistent with some of the things you just said, and again, I'll give a very simple definition based on my understanding. I'll be honest. I don't have much education in formal biology, so I'll just give to the education and knowledge that I do have. So as far as gender versus sex is based on your biological makeup, so and specifically your reproductive organs. Now, and I will acknowledge that all that you just stated about some of the ambiguity and deviances from sexual organs, I will stay consistent with my definition because those are deviations. And in quite extreme cases, when you're talking about an excess of 97, 98% are one way, and then there's a small deviation that's less than 2%, that's a very small deviation. However, I will acknowledge it. And so So I think sex is essentially biological. That's scientific. Gender is gender is a term. Gender is based on terminology that is derived from your sex. And I believe, and I want to be explicit about this, I believe that your gender is always derived from your sex. I do not
Okay,
believe that
perfect. Yeah.
gender and sex do not stand apart.
So not good. So now we disagree.
There we go.
All right.
There we go,
Okay.
baby.
All right.
So just want to get on a word in edgewise while I have the chance. I don't know if that was you, Nico, but someone named Nico said hello in chat. So hello, Nico. If that's not you, if it is,
okay.
If it is you, Nico, hello to you as well.
I wanted know that was me.
I wanted to rebound back and take back the conversation a little bit, and just ask a clarifying question that I meant to at the very beginning. And that was,
sure.
with exception of religious text, you said you defined the action of homosexuality as sinful. I mean, with exception of the religious text, how do you get your morality? Do you, how do you come to this moral agenda or moral construct? And then as far as personally, my definition, since, I've been kind of just observing and kind of paying attention, I would probably define male versus female as a biological term and man and woman as a social one. And we can kind of get into that and address it going into the conversation we were about to get into. But if you don't mind clarifying your moral origin or moral foundation, since you think that the action of homosexuality is immoral, if you're excluding, I mean, I know you said you would also include, religious text, but without them, how do you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so what I'll answer first is how, or as best as I can explain, because this is where it gets deep and philosophical. And again, I don't have the depth and breadth of knowledge to explain as I wish I did. But so I believe morality is intrinsic. I believe that people are, for lack of a better term, are given morals, are given morals, whether it be passed down from generation to generation, whether it's as you come into adulthood, you just essentially have a sense of what's right and what's wrong, almost a conscience of what's right and what's wrong. And it's when it, on more general, broad topics and issues, there seems to be quite extreme consistency with those. And then topics that seem to be more nuanced and recently publicly accepted, there seems to be a lot of difficulty. And I'll give specific examples. Like outside of religious texts, most civilizations around the world agree that senseless murder, and by senseless, I mean without some sort of reason that justifies why you did what you did. And I'll be very specific with this. Like if I'm in my house and someone breaks in and starts to stab, for example, my children, excuse the gore, but then I can probably take their life, and most civilizations would agree that I was just in doing so outside of a religious text. However, if I'm walking down the street and I see a guy, he smiles at me, and I don't like his smile, I then take his life. Most cultures and civilizations would agree that that is morally wrong. That is wrong to do. So it's almost and so you might ask the question, well, how do they figure? What makes murder wrong? Why is that? And I would say, more than a religious text, it's intrinsic. It's the same thing with lying and deception and stealing. If something belongs to you and you take it, most civilizations and cultures around the world would agree that that is wrong for an individual to do without reason or justification. And I believe there's certainly historically there's religious text attached to essentially everything we do in every culture and every civilization. But also, I believe a lot of these things we arrive at intrinsically. And it
sounds like you're appealing to natural law, essentially.
Yeah,
It's kind
yeah,
of written on our heart.
Do you
Okay.
yeah,
do
there's
you do you
absolutely
think
an
I would
morality can
like
attribution
change?
here.
so okay, all right. So like just to pause for a second because like I think we're a little off topic,
Okay,
but I would definitely like to we need to have you back on and we'll compare natural law to secular humanism.
sure.
I think that this would be great. But we at least do have your I guess your basis for saying the I guess um anything other than what cisgender is what immoral, right? So that would include like the entire LGBT community, I assume, right?
Uh, well, again, I just want to distinguish
Of the
not the
act
community
from the
that
attraction.
correct. Yes,
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So you had said that gender is always derived from sex.
correct.
Okay. So check this out. So you know, not only do men and women like they have like different like chromosomes and different body parts, right? So it, you know they have different types of brains. There's-
Yes.
yeah, so there's a study I could show you where they were using these scans and they were able to determine the sex of someone by just looking at the brain with like an accuracy of like 93%.
Okay.
And what we find is that with transgenders, that the type of brain that they have correlates to their gender identity, not the type of sex organs they have.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, so when they say that someone says, "I feel like a woman trapped in a man's body,"
Uh-huh.
that's a pretty good definition of what is happening empirically. Like they have a brain that functions the way that you would expect to see in a female, but it's inside of a male's body. And if you remember,
Okay.
we had already established that you can be born with the wrong sets of organs, right? Like how the man was born with a uterus, right?
Yes,
So
we acknowledge that there's some deviation from the norm.
couldn't someone be born with the wrong brain? They
Right.
identify with a gender that does not correspond to their sex.
I personally do not believe so.
Really? So what about okay? We have like hundreds of examples of people like scan the
Mhm.
brains, the
Mhm.
transgenders, right? And we know what a female brain looks like. We know what a male brain looks like. This
Correct.
person walks in, they have a male body,
Hmm.
and we scan their brain, and everything about this scan tells us it's a female brain.
Uh-huh.
You're saying that person doesn't exist?
What I'm saying is that, and I want to draw a distinction. You're talking about an adult who walks in to get their brain scanned, and then you also stated someone who is born with a brain that is different from like a male body, female brain. If this scan that you referred to occurs at birth, and these were the results, I may have a different opinion. But you're talking about an adult brain in an adult person. The brain does not stay the same from your infancy to adulthood. It is changed based on things you go through. For example, individuals, and I see them all the time based on my line of work, individuals who at a young age experimented with heavy drugs, opioids, whatever the case may be, as they grow older and continue to use these drugs, the entire, I'm talking the physical shape of their brain is far different from what it would have been had they never used some of those drugs.
Okay,
And the same thing goes for young people who experience extreme trauma. And that's why it's easier for
No.
them to be given to addiction, given to vices, things that essentially are self-harmful, because they are they are physically based on their brain, they're physically a different person. They have a different genetic, almost a different genetic makeup, because of what they've experienced and the life that they've lived. So if you again, if you do this scan that you're referring to, if it happens
Mhm.
at birth, I would like to see the results from
Well, But here's the thing: like if you doing it at birth would be a
Mhm.
bad idea because the brain isn't fully developed till they're
Well,
like
well,
25.
well, I'm not
So
saying. Well, I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying there's a big difference in the brain from infancy to adulthood and what that person has gone through in their life.
yeah, but here's the thing. So yes, there are things that could change the chemical states of the brain. You could have injuries that could actually change the physical appearance of the brain. But that's not what they're talking about here. There's no chemical that I could take and then tomorrow feel like a woman. But that's not what's going on here. Like there are
I
re
That's
there,
not
there
what I'm saying.
okay, but so okay, so tell me what you're saying. That's what it sounded like. You were saying that it could be altered and it, like a transgender's brain is just altered in the same way that a drug addict's brain is altered.
No, what I'm saying is that when your brain develops both internally as far as your thoughts and your line of thinking and who you are, and externally as far as its actual physical, its texture, its shape, it develops in both ways based on the way that you live your life. If you can, for example, if you start to if you start to feel like if you have a male body and you start to feel as though you're a female at say 14 years old, and then from 14 to 30 years old you say that you are a woman, people around you say that you are a woman, you act like a woman, you dress like what you feel to be a woman, you and all these other things, and you continue to tell yourself this, and you continue to have external reinforcements of the same line of thinking. When you are turn 30, now again, I'm not scientifically familiar with brain scans and necessarily how they all work, but your brain will not be the same as it would have been if you were simply a 14-year-old male and you thought that you were a 14-year-old male and lived that way until you were 30.
So these scans, like, they don't. It's not a good idea to do them on brains that are still developing. Like you after the
Sure,
brain.
I
So
agree. I'm
so
okay
like
with
so
that.
yeah. So not. I'm not even saying for the harm of the person that's being scanned. It's not like it's gonna hurt them or something. But like
Sure.
so, what they're looking at. So there are different parts of for instance, like females have greater brain, they have greater volume in the prefrontal cortex,
Okay.
and right. There's not a It's not something they could go through to change the geometry of that,
Okay.
right? Also have more mass in the superior temporal cortex, right,
Okay.
and the lateral cortex, right. Um, Males have greater volume in something called a ventral temporal, and I'm not even sure what all of these things mean. So I'm not trying to make out myself like I'm some sort of neuroscientist. I don't know what these parts of the brains mean, but these aren't regions that that can increase and decrease in brain matter due to some life experience. That's not what's happening here. So like the cis, this is what I'm saying, like the cisgender people, I could put you on a scan and you're gonna more than likely have a brain that corresponds to your biological sex. It would make perfect sense that you're cisgender. So like, but it sounds like when you put somebody on a scan and it differentiates, right, and it differs.
Uh-huh.
You're saying that right there is impossible.
No, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying that I don't trust that. I don't trust that the only that the brain has not been affected by the experiences of that person.
I mean, I
And
don't think
Well,
anyone's
sure.
going to deny the ideals and concept of nature versus nurture, which I think is what you've been kind of talking about for a while. But I mean, that doesn't change the fact that their brain is quite literally altered and can be scanned to prove as such. So what I think Gio's trying to get across is that if an adult person who identifies as a female but has a genetically born male body, that their
Mhm.
brain will actually be scanned and recognized as female because that's the way their brain has developed in most cases. Just like if you, as a cisgender person, were to have your brain scanned as an adult male, chances are we'd be able to identify you as a male. So we're not saying
Let
that
me,
nature and nurture don't play have an impact on people's brains. That's an obvious thing that's been around for ages. It's just that it seems that you have an issue with that when you have transgender people going in and having brain scans and it coming up with something different than what their genetic male or female bodies were born as. So my question is like, what's the issue there? It seems that there's obvious
well,
correlation between brain and identifying the sex of a person versus
well,
their gender
well. Let me.
identity.
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime you use a study or scientific information like this, when you're talking about brain scans and what the results show, you have to what I'm questioning is this, how closed and how tight is this data? How closed is this research? How consistent are these brain scans? For example, has there
93% accuracy.
well, wait a minute. Has there
Yeah.
ever been, and what would you say to individuals who identify as females and they get their brain scanned and the brain is that of a male? Then where do those people fall into the cat? And so without specific knowledge on a study like this and how consistent and how close, and then the person's lifestyle and whether that makes a difference at all. And again, how would you measure whether they're, yeah, exactly, nurture versus nature? How could you measure the effect of the nurture, the experience that they have versus nature when they're an adult?
A, I don't think it's relevant, and then B, it seems like now you're
Why
trying
wouldn't
to,
it be relevant?
because we don't care whether it's nature versus nurture that leads them down the path they lead. We're
No,
concerned
no, I'm
as to
talking about
whether
their
brain
brain,
is
not their lifestyle.
yeah, but we're talking about brain scans here. So you're saying nature
Correct.
versus nurture, which develops the brain, and we're saying if you scan a brain, you can determine something. That's it. So it doesn't
Right.
matter the nature or nurture they received. We're saying by scanning their brain, you can determine a fact. Right, and to the other point I wanted to address is that now it seems like you're playing favorites. When we talk about there's 1.7% of people born intersex, you're like, oh, that's an outlier. Well, what if 1.7% of these brain scans come back with the wrong thing? It's an outlier. The fact of the matter is, in a majority of cases, when scanning a brain, it correctly identifies with the gender the person identifies as, not the sex that person was born as.
So I think you're misunderstanding. First of all, I'm not playing favorites at all. What I'm doing is I want, if you're going to use a study or use scientific data, if for me to accept it as fact, what does this data show? What is the consistency between this data? And nurture versus nature certainly matters. I mean, why wouldn't that matter?
Because we don't care
That's almost like saying
how the brain
all
got
these
there.
guys. That's almost like saying all these guys over here are stronger than all those guys over there, and it's like, well, how many hours have they spent in the gym? It's like, well, that doesn't matter. Well, what do you mean it doesn't matter?
No, pause. It's more like this. We're trying to determine, like, you come into a hospital and you're bleeding out. We don't really care what happened. We need to know how to stop the bleeding, right?
Sure.
When we're talking about scanning a brain, we're trying to determine a person's, like, how they identify sexually, right? So it doesn't really matter the nature or nurture. We're trying to identify this one thing. So if we can identify this one thing, it really doesn't matter what leads to it. And if we're trying to stop your bleeding,
it certainly matters.
It really doesn't, though, because
let's use that same example.
Go for
somebody. So let's and you may not know this.
What's the goal in mind?
You know what
That's all you have to know.
Sorry,
I said all you really need to know is what's the goal in mind when performing something.
Correct. And so oftentimes in order to know the goal in mind, you have to know the circumstances that occurred. And let me use your very example. If someone walks into the hospital and they're bleeding, let me tell you something. A bullet wound is oftentimes a lot more severe as far as ability to take your life than a knife wound is. However,
that's incorrect in general.
Sorry?
That's incorrect in general. I can tell you there are certain, like, it's all about location. There are two things in a triage emergency situation that people take into account. One is your breathing pattern. The other is your heart rate. They don't care whether you've been shot or stabbed. Just look up basic triage. That's across the board.
Okay. So, however, again, I didn't say it's basically because whether or not you've been shot or stabbed. I wasn't finished. So again, if a bullet on average, a bullet will do more damage to a person than a stab wound would, and that's because a bullet has the unique ability, more so than a knife, or it's easier for a bullet to reach vital organs than it is for a knife to. So on average, a bullet wound is going to be more damaging to that person than a knife wound would be. So, however,
So what's the goal of the hospital?
Typically, wait a minute, let me finish. Typically, knife wounds look worse. Typically, there's more blood. The gape is the size of the hole is bigger. And if you just look at a bullet wound, oh, it's just a little hole, and you patch it up, that's not the end of the story. You have to know that it's a bullet wound, so that perhaps that bullet is lodged into the lungs. Perhaps it collapsed a lung. Perhaps it broke a lung. Perhaps it broke a bone interior. This internal bleeding. You have to know the full story of what's happening. It's not as simple as just stop the bleeding. You have to know why the bleeding is occurring, what organs are damaged, if any. The context matters. History matters. What is the history here? What happened?
What's the goal of the hospital?
Sorry?
What's the goal of the hospital?
To rescue the person or make sure the person is safe and healthy.
Okay, and in order to do so, they must make an analysis of that person's condition.
Correct.
Okay, but if you're trying to make an analysis of that person's position, you don't really need to know whether they're male or female unless it's hit reproductive organs, right? They get shot in the foot, it doesn't matter their gender or their sex, right?
Absolutely not.
Okay, cool. So what I'm saying is it's dependent on the goal. If the goal of a brain scan is to determine someone's sex, then that's the end game of the brain scan, right? Versus the goal of a hospital, if you have a gunshot wound or a stab wound to the foot, is to treat the foot. It doesn't matter whether it's a stab wound or a shot. It matters that you treat the foot. Because that's
Correct.
the end game, right? So that's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to get convoluted into, like, okay, what if it hits major organs, or what if they get shot in the face versus stabbed in the chest? Like, yeah, but if the goal is to treat a person, or if the goal is to determine one fact, that's a big difference. We're trying to determine a fact when performing these brain scans, and we notice a pattern. If you want to give an exact example of that, you say, in all cases in which someone's shot, because in all cases in which someone has a brain scan, we determine this. And in all cases in which someone's shot, we determine this. You have to use you can't go back and forth here. While I'm at it, I'll let you respond to that.
Misquoted by example. I don't.
I will genuinely let you respond to it. I just think you're really convoluting the issue here. When determining an end goal,
I think we're getting lost in the weeds. So
let's address the comments on the screen. I'll let either of you continue from there.
Okay, go ahead.
One, if a guy says that he feels like a woman, shouldn't his scan be a woman's? If that's a person that's an adult, they've been identifying as a woman, very typically their brain will be scanned and identified as a woman's.
Yes.
Does that mean it will?
Right there. I want to
not necessarily.
Because I just can't accept the term very typically. Like, what does that mean?
How often? I think the number was over 90%.
How often do you scan people? Like, have you scanned all people who?
Clearly not. There's 8 billion people on the planet.
Can I break down the study? So this study, they scanned, like, it was from 11,000 images, right? So there's a lot of people, and ranging from 44 to 50 and 22 to 35.
Okay.
Right. Sorry. So these weren't adolescent. These weren't children's brains who were still developing. Right. These.
Sure.
For the most part. Right. Because you have some 22-year-olds in there. Right. And we know it's fully developed to 25. But when you break down the anatomy of the brain, right, you can. They were able to tell with a 93% accuracy based on the sizes of different parts what your biological sex was. Problem is, they were getting some of it wrong. You know why? Because there was transgenders in the mix. Because they would scan the brain, you pop up as a biological woman. Oh, whoops, you have a penis. Oh, you're transgender? Well, that kind of explains it.
Yeah, and second
that's
comment real quick is from uncommentary. It says the path doesn't matter to reach the destination if the goal is the destination. That was kind of my point. Like, I think what was happening is, like, if you have a purpose in mind, a brain scan to determine someone's sex, and you scan someone and you're able to determine their sex. So you notice that these certain parts of the brain are larger in women or smaller in men or bigger in men and smaller in women, etc. And then you get this outlier and that person identifies as transgender and they correlate with the cisgender people that you've scanned before. This is how you get that stat. This is where these numbers come from. And so my point was that if the goal is to determine someone's sex with this brain scan, then it doesn't necessarily matter of the nature or nurture of that person. What matters is, are you able to successfully determine their sex based off of a brain scan? And in the outlying cases that were performed during this study, it was thrown off because of transgender people in the mix, which means that the study, which were able to successfully identify cisgender males and cisgender females correctly, often identified transsexual people incorrectly because the size of their brain correlated to the gender that they identified with.
Okay.
So a question: so if a person can be born with the wrong sex organ, why not with the wrong brain? I mean, the brain is just an organ as well.
Well, again, yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that. Oh, go
so
ahead.
if you say yeah, I'm gonna mean to cut you off, but like if you said yes, and doesn't that mean you accept the existence of transgender people can exist then, right? Someone could be transgender. I mean, honestly, feel like a woman inside a male's body.
No, I believe that gender and sex are correlated, directly correlated, and gender is derived from sex.
So
now,
but
if there, sorry, okay,
go ahead.
Yeah. Now, if there are people, as you stated before, who are born with sort of ambiguous genitalia, then you have to acknowledge that as a deviation, if it's a deviation. And I think based on all people that are born and the consistency with those who have, for example, those who have male reproductive organs and eventually identify as men, and same with those who have female reproductive organs and identify as women, those are, I mean, the consistency is extreme. It's an excess. And so why is that it's almost as if that's overlooked and not acknowledged?
It's not overlooked, because what I'm saying is that deviation, when you look at it as percentage wise, it looks small. When you look at it as far as the whole number in an aggregate, you realize it's between 170 million and 200 million people. That's what I'm saying. So like, so you have an entire nation of people who don't have a biological sex, and you're saying we can just ignore all of those people because they're outliers.
No, I'm not saying just ignore them. I'm saying acknowledge them as outliers.
But I mean, as categories is concerned, like as far as like cladistics is concerned, as in classifying biological sex.
Sure. So what I don't believe, this is what I don't believe. I'm not saying just ignore those people. I'm saying that no mammal under the sun has the luxury of choosing whether they're a man or a woman. You just don't. You do not have the luxury to choose whether you're a man or a woman.
Are you using the term as gender,
furthermore,
or using
you
the
talked
term
about
as sex?
this ambiguity in reproductive organs. You see, and this is where it starts to go down a rabbit hole.
Just a clarifying question. You said you can't choose between a man if you're a man or a woman. No, are you talking like their sex, or are you talking about their gender?
Yeah,
I'm talking about both because they're correlated.
Okay. So
you cannot pick your sex. You cannot pick your gender.
Okay.
So pick either.
All right. So here's like I actually agree with you, because their gender is determined by the brain, not by the sex. You don't determine what type of brain you have. That's not what transgenders are doing. They're not just changing their gender.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe that, and this is, I won't go all the way down this, I'll just ask this just to clarify all that you're saying. So you believe that gender identification is binary?
Gender is not binary.
So
Biological
you're saying
sex.
gender's not binary.
No, gender is not binary.
So the brain scans also identify
Yes.
they
Here's the
and
thing.
Z
Okay, so check this out. No,
and
no, no.
Megatron.
No. Here's the thing. Like you have different. You have like a bunch of different. You have like 11,000 brains you're looking at, right? And
Okay.
when they notice that with the male brains, one area is really big, and the other area is really small,
Okay.
right? And then you have brains that as you look more and more in the middle, it becomes more ambiguous. They have some
Okay.
brains that are somewhat masculine and some brains that are super masculine, just like our genders. Like for instance, like you and I, like like you're a football player, you're a cop, you're a big dude, all that kind of stuff. You're like super masculine. People look at me as the same way, so we will come across as super masculine, right? And then there's other guys that who may not be into that thing. Maybe they're into they're not into weightlifting or they're into bright clothing and sometimes wear makeup and stuff, right? They would be
Sure.
seen as less masculine. It's the way I look at it as a range. On one side you have masculine, on the other side you have feminine, and then there's like blurs in the middle.
Okay. And why do you look at it that way?
Well, that's
As far as actual
that's
gender identity.
I mean,
Well,
I look at it that way
Now, I
specifically
agree that
because
now,
I
I
think
agree
it's a
that
social
masculinity
construct.
and femininity is on a scale, sure. But why, as far as gender identity, would you look at it along the same scale?
Because I was pulling that from honestly from the brain scans, right? Because we're looking at like characteristics of a male brain. There are certain male brains that will have more masculine characteristics than others.
Okay.
So whenever we draw the line, say, because you're going to get to a point where it's going to get so ambiguous you won't be able to know the difference. So you have to draw that line somewhere, right?
Yeah,
And so
but
that means there's ranges.
right,
So
the range
there's
of
certain brains that
masculinity
are
and
more
femininity, but how does that range of masculinity and femininity, how does that correlate with gender identity?
because
Like, 'cause you can have guys that are, what do they call them, like Usher, what's that, metrosexual or whatever, who identify as I'm a man.
yeah, sure.
And so what is it? And their masculinity may vary from
But that's what we're talking about.
infantry Marine Corps guy, but the
when,
gender is the same.
when we're talking about gender, that's where we're talking about masculinity and femininity. When we're talking about biological sex, that's not what we're
Wait,
talking about.
whoa. Gender, wait, whoa. So you're saying that gender and your gender identification
Yep.
correlates with your I forget the term for your measurable masculinity versus femininity? Because if that's what you're
Yes,
saying, that's quite different from the LGBT community at large.
I don't claim to be speaking for like anyone like other than myself. But
Sure.
but here's the thing. So like you have when we talking about like what gender roles are, they're developed from society, right? There are roles that are
No, they're not.
described. Huh? Gender
No, they're
roles?
not.
You said gender roles aren't okay. Give me your
Gender
biological
itself is
gender role.
societal, but that's
Well,
just my 2 cents.
sorry. You know what? Maybe I spoke too soon. What do you mean when you say developed by society? What do you mean by that?
The roles of different genders, like the idea that a woman.
Right, but what do you mean by they are developed by society?
Well,
society
societally, historically, the typical things that were assigned to the more masculine of people included, I mean, very, very historically, almost prehistorically even, to the point of like hunters. Because you would need someone who had a lot of testosterone to do things like pull home dead animals to feed.
Sure,
the rest
that's
of
why I'm
people.
asking, because I think we agree.
So, and then you would things that like involved things that were more feminine, if you will, often also led to people with more effeminate qualities. So when
Sure.
you
Okay.
have excess levels of testosterone versus estrogen, then typically you get assigned roles and jobs accordingly, because it's way
Okay.
easier for someone with a lot of testosterone to lift something extremely heavy over and over again than someone who
Sure.
has an excessive amount of estrogen to do the same task.
Sure.
So
Okay. I see what you're
historically,
saying.
even
But that's not
prehistorically, it's led us to
okay.
where we are.
Do you mean that? So I agree with you, but I think historically and prehistorically, it's not necessarily. It's not really formally decided, but more naturally realized.
Well, no,
Like
not
when
necessarily.
women go to war and they lose really bad, so then they're
So,
like, "Oh wait, this doesn't work," kind of deal.
so here's the thing. Like, I'm not saying it has literally no connection at all to biology, but it's not
Sure.
just that. So, so sure. These gender roles, like men going out in the hunt, women staying
Uh-huh.
back and cooking, like
Uh-huh.
these are like somewhat naturally developed by the culture
Sure.
because
Okay. Then
people
we
tend to be
agree.
better at different things.
Sure. Then we agree. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Just a
So
real quick heads up.
that,
It's
I was
currently 7 p.m. and I know Geo typically goes and feeds his kids soon. Just wanted to kind of give you a heads up on time and address the comment real quick. It says, wait, so sex organ has nothing to do with distinguishing male or female. On commentary,
and
that's kind of the whole crux of the debate here. I think we're talking sex versus gender currently, and I typically try to
I can answer
distinguish.
this really quick.
Yeah,
So,
go
like,
for it.
yeah, so like the biological definition of sex is that they determine your sex by the size of your gametes, like your reproductive cells, whether sperm or egg, right? So if you have a bunch of really small gametes, sperm, you're a male. If you have a few really large gametes, they call them egg, you're a female. And that has no correlation at all to your organ or to your physical appearance. That's the way they determine that in biology.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what I wanted to just clarify real quick is just because I think it would have helped is that typically when referring to male and female, most people typically are referring to biological terms versus masculine, feminine, men, and women are typically gender terms. So that's just something to clarify because when talking biologically, as Gio just stated, we're talking about the size of gametes. So we typically use male and female versus man, woman, masculine, feminine, etc. are typically gender terms, which often have societal connotation.
Yes, and so question. I think Nico had asked a question earlier about when I was saying gender roles. You asked me if sex is binary or gender is binary, right?
Gender,
Okay, so
according to what you believe.
okay, so gender. Well, it's not even a matter of belief here. Like I said, like there's tons of cultures all over the world that had more than two genders, right? So it's this isn't just my belief here. But gender is definitely not binary. It's on a spectrum. When we talk about gender, we're talking about like how many gender roles, how many the typical gender roles do you feel? And because we're not all identical, we're not clones of each other. Certain men fill more masculine gender roles than other. Certain women fill more feminine gender roles than others. So in that sense, it's a spectrum. When we talk about biological sex, it's not a spectrum. When we no no when we use the right definition by the size of the gametes. When you use the definition that a lot of your conservatives are using, talking about the sex organs or the chromosomes, that's when it can look kind of tricky. Because remember, it's not just XX and XY. It's like there's like 24 or so different variations of that.
And I think the reason kind of why, as far as I can tell, it gets kind of sticky with those definitions. And I know you mentioned conservative versus the
Mhm.
left or what have you. Is well, so when you're talking scientifically and you're analyzing gametes and brain scans, and okay, You know what? Those studies, that to me, that's a really good thing, and I'm willing to investigate those studies and read up on them and see, okay, what are we finding biologically with these humans? What is in their brain? What is their gametes, what have you? All that. I'm willing to investigate that. The problem I have is that even the left, it does not seem to champion this line of thinking, especially when you talk about gender and gender identity. It is not based on what scientifically is discovered inside of you. This is you When it comes to gender, you essentially, as an adult, you get to pick. Is the point is what has come across so clearly to me. You get to pick. And then oftentimes when asked, well, how many genders are there? You usually can't get an answer, and if you do get an answer, it's either infinite or something related to infinite.
So,
Which,
but here's the thing. So, like, you could say that like, the reason why it's hard to get into is because it exists on a spectrum, and anything on
wait, what
anything on
exists on a spectrum?
gender identity.
And how is that? Is that a measured spectrum or just a
Well,
just a developed and thought of spectrum?
there are lines that are arbitrarily drawn. So, like, how about think about this? You could say, like, how many colors are in a rainbow, right? And it goes from violet to blue to green to yellow, orange, and red. So it's 6 different colors, right? We just drew those arbitrary lines. You could draw more lines and get different colors.
Actually,
We have
just a
we just
really fun
decided, hey, this is
clarification.
where we're going to draw the lines, and we're going to say these are the colors,
Just
and
a really fun
you can do
clarification
that
because I'm
with
pedantic. The indigo is actually considered a color of the rainbow, so there's 7.
yeah, sure. So, okay, so we're drawing those lines like arbitrarily. You can put them anywhere you want. You can put as meaning as you want. And so, and that's the thing with when we're talking about gender identity. You have you have this on one extreme you have masculinity, and on the other end you have femininity, and then you can be anywhere in between. It's like probably all 3 of us would probably end up on the hyper masculinity line, right? And
Well,
then
I would
go ahead.
digress to that.
Okay,
let me
okay.
let me use your rainbow example to ask you a question. So, even though perhaps we've drawn these lines and kind of identified the 7 colors because it's probably easier for categorization or what have you. So, the additional colors within the rainbow, regardless of how many there are, it is still objective. It's not subjective. It's
No.
objective because the rainbow. What'd you
It
So,
say?
really depends on
okay,
how nuanced you want to be.
so how
I'm sorry.
So that really depends on how nuanced you want to be.
It does, right? Because, like, when I draw the line between red and orange, right? Like, when I say, "Hey, this is definitely orange. This is definitely red." Like, if we're gonna say we're gonna draw the line here, we're gonna say this is we're going to call this label this we're objectively label this as red. Sure, you can do that, but that line is arbitrary.
Sure, and I agree with that. But listen to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that whether you draw 6 lines, and so that gives you 7 different colors, okay, what have you. If you now, let's say you draw 70 lines, okay, and that gives you 71 or 72 different colors, then it's still, we're not guessing colors here. It's still objective. And maybe you'd have to, I don't know, have a really high resolution camera or zoom in times 1,000. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what you name them. They are still objectively there.
Well,
And
sure, yeah, I agree that they're
regarding
definitely
gender,
objectively there. Like,
right. So
however,
what I'm
we
asking you regarding gender though is, it doesn't seem like nothing is objectively there. Whenever someone wants to, they can come up with a new gender and they can identify as that. And that's what's being accepted as reality. This is reality because it's their reality, and that's the end of the story. And I don't believe that. I think that's nonsensical.
so here's the thing with the rainbow analogy, you could zoom in between red and orange and find the color of a frequency that's in between those two colors and say, hey, this is
Sure,
another color.
sure.
But here's the thing. When we draw those lines in the colors, we're skipping all the frequencies in between. And that's fine because rainbows are it's just electromagnetic radiation. They're just photons, right? They're consciousless particles. So we don't care what happens to them. We don't want to do that to people. So we want to be a little more careful because we don't want to group a bunch of genders into one.
But okay, but still, so the amount of genders, regardless of the title or name, is it objective?
So
Like the
I mean,
colors of the rainbow, is it objective? Objectively there.
the rainbow is objectively there, but the colors that we derive from it, we just drew those lines there arbitrarily.
I'm
The-
not talking about the lines. I'm talking about the colors in between the lines that we drew. Those colors that go into however to infin to 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever the case may be in between red and orange, regardless of whether we identify them or name them, they are still objectively there. I'm
I think
asking for the
But
gender
sure.
I
spectrum.
can tackle
Are
this
they
for you.
objectively there?
Yes, the genders are objectively there, but like, have we figured out an exact, precise number to each of them? No, we have not.
Okay.
But if so, it sounds like you're describing ontology, and I'm talking about epistemology. Like, yes, it's objectively there, but we haven't figured out the precise way to label all.
Well,
of
no,
these.
no, no. No. That's what I was asking. Are they there? And I was waiting for you to say yes. So you just now said yes. Okay,
Okay.
that's all I was asking.
I think we had a question that came through. Hey, Fasad, are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay. It says interesting. So does a smaller / larger gamete ever produce the opposite of an expected organ? So like the gametes on its own, they don't produce organs. What they do is the gamete. We're essentially just talking about like a sperm and an egg, right? It comes together and it makes another. Makes a baby, is essentially. So that happens. I guess maybe I'm kind of not really following the question.
I think the question is more. This is just speculation. If I'm incorrect, you're more than welcome to correct me. But
Okay.
it seems that the question is more like in general cases of testes versus ovaries. Do ovaries ever produce large gametes, and do testes ever produce like small gametes, and
Gotcha,
testes
gotcha,
produce
gotcha.
like large gametes?
Oh, so I had did a some research on that to see if that was the case, and no, I couldn't. There's been no. There's been no scientist has ever found that to ever happen. Nor has anyone been found. No human has ever been found to produce both sets of gametes, to have sperm and egg inside them. But they've had both organs.
Yeah, typically in cases of intersex, and I want to be very specific here, not every case of intersex, but intersex people who are born with partial or full sets of sexual organs, typically only one of those function, which is oftentimes how that person ends up determining who they are, or they may have a determination made for them in some cases, unfortunately. But in the cases, there's never been a case, as far as historically shown, in which a person is born with ovaries and testes that produce eggs and sperm. And as far as we know, that can happen in other animals in the animal kingdom, but that cannot happen in humans, to our knowledge.
A flounder actually do it. If there's not a
there's
female
actually quite
around,
a few animals that can do it.
Yeah.
But most of those being fishes, reptiles,
Yeah.
and or amphibians. But
flounders will turn into females if there's not a female around.
Yeah, typical common tree frog or reed frogs will as well. They'll actually spontaneously change sexes, and they can't quite pick a determining reasoning behind why that would happen, with exception of increasing their own chance of production.
There was another. Then we kind of beat the transgender horse to death. There was a, so to speak. Actually, Fasad, maybe you want to edit that last sentence out this podcast. There was the other
more
point.
work, I
Another point that I thought was pretty interesting is is there an LGBTQ plus agenda? So what do you think? What do you think, Nico?
I believe that there is an
Okay.
LGBTQ plus agenda.
And what do you think that agenda is?
You know, as far as I can tell, it is to expand their community as large as they possibly can. It does not seem to
What do you mean
be.
by that? Expand the community? Like, you mean like
Yep.
turning people gay?
No, not necessarily, but possibly. I don't believe that the LGBTQ plus community is their goal is simply to advocate for themselves. I do believe that they are interested in expanding, and so I'm not necessarily saying turning people gay, but I believe if given the opportunity to expose people, specifically those who are more vulnerable, like young children, to homosexuality and what it means to be homosexual and possibly becoming homosexual, I certainly believe, and again, I'm not assigning this to any individual, but the community at large would not hesitate. Certainly. I also believe that, it's interesting because I oftentimes hear about LGBTQ, rights. And I think sometimes it's so convoluted. It's so LGBT people have the same rights as people who are heterosexual. The same rights across the board.
Well, yeah, but that may not be enough, right? Because we can look at, like, I mean, I'm not sure how familiar you are with case law. You're familiar with the court case Plessy versus Ferguson?
Not in depth.
Okay, so probably not the name, but you know what I say. It's the Supreme Court case that said separate but equal. It allowed Jim Crow laws. It's what Brown versus Board of Education overturned, right?
Sure.
So
yes.
In that case, it said their argument was black people and white people have the same rights. You have a black bathroom, you have a white bathroom. So is simply saying you have the same rights enough?
Not necessarily.
Okay. That's why I like to push back on, because that doesn't mean that there isn't anything to fight for. Because,
perhaps, yeah, no, that does not mean. However, I think when you look at the LGBT community and how they advocate and what they advocate for, it's almost as though and I'm glad you used that example, because they draw a lot of comparisons to racism, and I think that for them and their community, the correlations, the similarities are not really close at all, or rather they're so far different that they ought not be, or it doesn't make much sense to compare the two, because one is referring to, and this is I think the issue that so many people take with the LGBT community is they don't just want to exist, they want to take over. They want to expand and expose more and more. They want to have curriculum in schools. They want to teach children. They want to have drag shows at schools. They want to have reading sessions with drag queens, all of which I believe is completely inappropriate. Completely inappropriate. If you want to live your lifestyle, live your lifestyle. But you don't need to infiltrate and what's the term I'm looking for? I forget the term that I'm looking for, but indoctrinate the minds of young children. I mean,
can you say that about everything in general? Because if not, I mean, like, are you going to draw the line somewhere? Because I mean, I could potentially push the same thing towards like generic religion. Like, I don't want you putting your religion on my children.
Right, which is why religion is removed from schools publicly.
But like, for instance, you can establish like religious centers, like churches,
Sure.
mosques.
So
what's the problem?
How about like
No. Wait, hold on. Let him finish. Go ahead. Sure.
So I mean, like, like, what's the problem with or for instance, like, do you have a problem with like Black History Month?
Well, I can address that later. But what does that have to do? What is the established like
so
religious
you
centers? What does that have to do with
how are
the
people,
LGBTQ community?
You asked people how people in the LGBT community were relating to racism, and racism was historically a set of people being prejudicial against another set of people. And
if I'm a gay
transgenderism
person, I can go and start a gay community center today.
Let me finish my statement. Transgenders are currently the most segregated and prejudiced against people currently living. That is just stat across the board. So how do people
but
that are
transgenders are not a people group?
Well, it depends how you define.
They're not a people group like
they're a group
Asian,
of people
like a Chinese person or a Japanese person.
Well, yeah, because that's ethnicity. Yeah. Because we're talking about gender identity.
Yeah, we're talking about people who identify as transgender. That's it. They're a group of people.
Okay.
That's
but
it.
They're not.
So if you're segregating them,
this is the problem. It's likened to racism as though. See, here's the difference. Your skin color, your race, the country you were born in, those things you absolutely cannot change, and that's not something you can hide from. It's
but why should it matter?
It's essentially what people first see when they see your skin color. Well,
why should it matter if it's static though? Like I can change my religion, but it still wouldn't be right for people to discriminate against me on the basis of that.
No, it's not.
Why do we limit it to just to static characteristics? Why don't it apply to mobile characteristics as well, like a religion or a place that you currently live or a job that you perform
or a political stance?
Yeah,
no,
stuff like
you
that.
do not. If you are a homosexual person, you do not automatically get discriminated upon. That does not happen.
No, it doesn't automatically happen.
No,
it doesn't. It depends. I guess how open you are and where you're at.
That depends on where you are.
So you were talking about
country
rights earlier.
But
saying equal rights. I'm sorry, I'm cutting somebody off. I'm hearing somebody talk.
I was just saying that depends on where you are, what country you're in, even where you are within that country. And
so also we were talking about like equal rights. So like not all rights are necessarily relevant. I remember one time I was at Liberty, and we were talking to a professor, and he said that this was before they instituted marriage equality, and he said that homosexuals had the same rights as heterosexuals. A gay man can marry any woman that he wants. Well, yeah, and I was like, well, that's a really stupid way to look at it because it's not relevant. It's not relevant.
Well, I think what he kind of made fast and loose with it, but I think his point is that I don't know him obviously, but the definition of marriage is between a man and a woman.
Well, not anymore.
That might be his definition.
Not anymore.
And honestly, like him being a Christian, I wouldn't even say that's. If you get the definition of marriage from the Bible, it's kind of strange, right? You can. It's between a man and several women, or whatever kind of arrangement.
Absolutely, baby. I need about 5 of them things. You heard? Heck yeah, baby!
All right, I'm gonna switch over to our wrapping up roll real quick. If you guys want to address anything real quick, because I'm sure Gio has to go feed his kid, but we're about half an hour over almost. So I'll let you guys get a statement in each, and then we'll wrap up.
A
statement in each. I didn't really.
Can I ask a final question?
Oh, sure.
As opposed to a final thing. I'm not sure. Do you know Roger Bryan from Liberty?
I do. Yeah.
You do? Okay. Yeah. Okay, I thought you did. So Roger and I are still close friends to this day. We chit chat a lot. Not as much
Mm-hmm.
recently, but we usually call each other often. We oftentimes get into pretty heated debates, man.
Want to get him on the show?
What's that?
You want to get him on the show?
Oh man, that would be fantastic.
Oh,
But
definitely.
I
Heck
had a
yeah.
question about something that I say to him. So I
Okay.
have, when we speak, I oftentimes accuse him of being being over concerned with equality, and to the extent that he sacrifices reality and truth. And so the question I have is based on that. I'm just curious, and not that I think you gentlemen would say something other than the truth, but I would like to say, just please answer as honestly as you possibly can. In this discussion, we've talked a lot about science and data and studies and brain scans and things of that nature, which I think is great. And I think the conversation should almost be centered around stuff like that. My question is this: do you at all believe that the ideas and I guess for lack of a better term, the side that you're on, as far as your ideas, do you think at all in any part it's based upon wanting to protect or defend the feelings and essentially quote unquote dignity of people, and at times perhaps overlook reality or truth?
Sure. So, as a secular humanist, like I'm of course very concerned about protecting the dignity of all people, right? Because
Okay.
like I care about humans. That's a big deal to me, and I would love, in my ideal world, everyone would be happy and equal, and they wouldn't some people, I mean, like you wouldn't be able to make judgments about different people based on their talents or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
So like that would be my ideal world.
Mm-hmm.
I would love that. So obviously I do have biases just like everyone else.
Okay.
Fortunately, I'm aware of those biases. So I know how to turn them off.
Okay.
There, and so when I was looking into to these studies, my my goal was to get down to the science. What from all of that human knowledge has learned studying this subject, what have we found
Mm-hmm.
objectively? Not and not with any sort of political agenda behind it. That was my goal.
Okay.
Even though I would even though I like the fact that, I'm not gonna lie, because I know what it likes. I know what it's like to be discriminated against, and I
Mm-hmm.
hate it. It
Sure.
disgusts me, right? And so, and I can empathize with people who go through this extreme discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
and I am I am I like I adore the fact that science actually affirms what these people are going through. That it affirms the fact that they aren't men just wearing dresses, or they aren't women just wearing men's clothes. That the
Okay.
science actually backs up what they're saying. I like that fact, but I didn't come to the conclusion based on hoping for that, based on that, on any sort of political preference.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough.
So facade, I don't know if you want to answer.
Sure. Mine will be very short and sweet. So Gio and I don't actually agree on some of the things we even talked about in this particular podcast. We definitely don't agree on everything in life in general. However, we've known each other a very, very long time, and so we will always continue to love and respect each other.
Mm-hmm.
With that out of the way, to answer your question specifically, I don't like people or care about their feelings.
Okay. Good.
However, um, I say that kind of in joking, but kind of in reality. I don't really care about what people feel. I care about reality, and I care about like what matters to kind of me. I'm a very selfish person, and I think everyone else is as well.
Sure.
But where I draw the line is when you start applying or forcing ideals and concepts and conceptualizations upon other people. So if you genuinely think that there is an agenda to push an ideal upon someone else, whether that be the idea of like pride or whether that be the idea of religion or anything else, I'd be against that. I'm all for people thinking logically and thinking critically and coming to their own conclusions based off of the data that they look into, and to continue seeking out new data and information. And as science and technology progresses and as our understanding changes, develops, and gets better, that they update that knowledge that they currently hold with new knowledge. And they continually improve themselves. With that in mind, I don't really care what people do because it's not impacting me. Where I draw the line is when it does impact me. So I'm fine if you want to go do drugs in your own house. Don't do drugs and then smash into my car because now you're impacting me. Outside of that, I don't really care what people do or what people want, and I don't really care about their feelings. What I care about is when you say this person has to fit this particular stereotype or particular role or particular ideal or concept. Now you're forcing something upon them that they didn't prescribe to. That's where I draw the line. I don't really care about that person's feelings, and I'm not trying to protect or defend them because they may feel a certain way. I'm trying to protect or defend someone in any provocation of information or idealism that isn't of their own accord. So I don't want you forcing your religion. I don't want you forcing your gender concepts or anything else upon anyone else. I want them to come to their own conclusion of their own accord with the own data that they have and continually look for the best, newest data and adjust accordingly.
Gotcha. Okay.
I like to say that answer definitely was not shorter than mine.
You're right. I thought it was going to be short and sweet, but it didn't. So, Nico, was there anything you wanted to wrap up with? You're more than welcome to have last word.
No, I'll just say that. Well, thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. I always think it's better to, at least at the very minimum, open the floor and have the discussion than to not. So I appreciate you gentlemen being forward in doing so, and this podcast certainly regarding things along the lines of closer to the subject matter. For anybody who listens to this, please don't mistake me or label me as, and we didn't even really get to delve into this too much, but that's okay. Please don't mistake me or label me as a homophobe. I know people who are gay. I know lesbians. I know people who are bisexual, and I even know transgenders. And if they didn't ask me specifically what my beliefs were regarding them, they would never know. And you certainly couldn't tell by my interaction. I love all people, but I do believe that there is objective truth, and I do believe some of these things we're diving into allowing people to dictate reality based on their feelings, which is why I have the positions that I have. But I do not hate people. I am not a homophobe, and I don't like that label, overall as is. But that's another conversation for another day. Again, really appreciate you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks
man.
for watching,
Most definitely.
guys. We'll see you next week.